All right, so we are in the midst of a transfer window in which several Americans are making big decisions regarding their careers. And we know you always love to lend a helping hand, and people love lists. So we thought we'd have you identify the 5 leagues in Europe that you think are the best destinations for young Americans right now.
Again, so for this, we're going to take out MLS and I guess Liga MX because those would absolutely be possibilities. Because they're readily available and so therefore easier. And I do think that they are of quality and of value to a young player. All right. So coming in at number 5, I'll just go from 5 to 1 here, would be La Liga. Guys like Johnny Cardoso, Luca de la Torre, Musa, different players that have played there. And I think that it is, from a stylistic perspective, something that American players would not only adapt on the field. I also think, look, there's a lot of American players that have grown up in a U.S. where a lot of people speak Spanish, and so I think that would be conducive because you have to think about those different things. Coming in at number 4, a place we've talked about a lot of these players that are playing: Daryl Dike, Josh Sargent, Reggie Cannon, Austin Trusty. The list goes on and on. Players that have been in the championship, obviously the second division over there in England. I did not include the EPL in my 5. I don't think that that's the right place for a young player. Again, these are young American players to immediately go to. So championship comes in at 4. Number 3, Serie A, and maybe that has changed and grown on me over the years, and certainly over the last couple of years. And we talk about Christian Pulisic and Yunus Musa now, and Weston McKennie, Tim Weah, Busio, and Tanner Tessman also in Serie B. So just, I think Italy has become more open to more American players coming in. Now, number 2 is the Eredivisie over there in Holland. Now, this is an old favorite and I think has a history when it comes to players. You look back at John O'Brien, and from a Brazilian perspective, we know that it loves young players. I know U.S. players aren't Brazilian, but Romarios and those types of players. Right now, Malik Tillman, Ricardo Pepi, Serginho Dest, Zach and Taylor Booth, these types of players. And I think it is conducive in general to young players and fostering young talent, but also specifically to U.S. players. And then coming in at number 1 is the Bundesliga. And I might not have said this too long ago, but I do, and I don't think it's necessarily changed, but maybe I've come around to it much more, in that I think that the Bundesliga, first off, has a system that not only fosters young talent, and we have seen it, and I'm not just talking about U.S. talent, but just talent in general, but also there's an appreciation for playing that talent and praising that talent, and then also moving that talent along if necessary. And we look right now in terms of Americans over there, and these are players that have a lot of experience when you talk about Timmy Chandler and Joe Scally and Paredes now, and the Aaronsons, Maloney, Downs, obviously Gio Reyna for now, P. Falk, these types of players. And you go back, whether it's Weston McKennie, who got his start there over in Europe, or even back to Eric Winaldo, our friend Eric Winaldo. So I have the Bundesliga at number 1, which means, by the way, that, something that's near and dear to you, France did not make my top 5, Portugal, Austria, Belgium. They're all good development types of leagues. But one of the reasons why France didn't is I'm not sure how conducive France is to specifically American players. I'm not sure, the French have trouble embracing anybody, let alone Americans. So I'm still not sure if that's something that's going to change over time. But right now, France does not make my top 5. Thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, on France, I've heard the rule there is if you can't pronounce Hans correctly, you're not allowed to play in that league. But no, the emergence of Serie A as now a popular destination for Americans has been fascinating to see. You, my friend, are the first ever American to have played in Serie A. What was the level of acceptance then when you arrived in the mid-90s?
Yeah, and then I left after a couple of years, so it was scorched earth for a long time. But eventually, they finally let some Americans back in, and now it's the open door is wonderful to see so many. I was a curiosity. Now, I had the advantage of playing in the '94 World Cup, and so there was a credibility associated with that. But also, that was back before the Bosman ruling. That was back before the European community opened up to the extent that it has now. And so you only had 3 outside of Italy that could play. And so it was myself and a Croatian and a Dutchman that were playing. This is the time when you had AC Milan and you had a whole all-star team that because of a rules perspective actually couldn't even get on the field because you could only have 3 at a time playing on the field. But it was the place to be. It was the most money. It was the most prestige. And while I had offers in England, Germany, and Italy, there was only one place that I was going. But I don't know, had I gone over at the tender age of a Gio Reyna or a Christian Pulisic, if that would have been the place for me to go. Because, language barrier, a very, very different culture than I was used to. The soccer, I will raise my hand and readily admit that I was much more rudimentary and I guess raw. It's probably not fair to myself, but the education that the players get now and the tactical acumen that they come fortified with, even at a young age, I think is more conducive to Serie A. I would have been interested how I would have fared in the EPL. And as I mentioned, the EPL is not in my top 5 here. I just think that it is, from a playing perspective, we talked about before, and it's not that Americans can't be physical and can't, but again, a young player, you got stars in your eyes, and you get dropped into the cauldron that is the EPL. And when I say the EPL, it's not just the actual league. It's the culture. And it's, all the shit that happens off the field and all of the narratives and the tabloid and the wags and the this and the that, all that kind of stuff that happens. I'm not sure getting your feet wet in Europe and getting your feet on the ground and getting steady, I'm not sure that the EPL is the best thing right off the bat. Might be good later on.
No, I agree with that, but it's interesting. We focus on outfield players.
Mm-hmm.
From a goalkeeper's perspective, then there is an incredible lineage of American goalkeepers in the Premier League, Tim Howard, Brad Friedel, et cetera.
In this day and age, Mosse, and I know I'm veering a little bit here, but it's interesting that you brought up goalkeeping. We just talked about it earlier this week about Zach Steffen coming back from Europe. We know that kind of strange trajectory that his career has taken. We know what Matt Turner, who, although starting for the U.S. team in the World Cup, he's taken a strange trajectory with first going over to Arsenal and now with Forest. In this day and age, where I think a lot of people make the argument that not only are our players better than they were in previous generations and previous iterations of the national team, but there's more of the quality that we have. As it pertains specifically to goalkeepers, I think, and let me know if you agree, that you can make a much stronger argument that goalkeepers of the past, American goalkeepers of the past, were better than what we have today, which is strange because the goalkeeping position has changed so dramatically in what we want them to do. Am I off?
No, you're right. Now, I happen to love Matt Turner.
Sure.
But overall, yeah, I think weirdly, as the U.S. has progressed in all these other positions, goalkeeping, they've regressed a bit. I don't think the U.S. is as good.
But if you walk into a room and I got Tony Meola and Brad Friedel and Casey Keller and Nick Raimondo and I don't know, Marcus Hanneman and the list goes on and on and on. Who am I throwing up there that makes an adequate type of comparison and is competitive with that type of group and that type of generation? I just don't think that we're doing that. And in our effort to become better as a soccer playing nation, we focused a lot on the actual players on the field and the field players that we have. And have we thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to goalkeeper? Or is this just a natural progression that any country or culture would take that was producing good goalkeepers for any number of reasons? And you can even go down to the fact that, look, we're a culture that most of our sports, use your hand. And so maybe that hand-eye coordination is ingrained from an early age for a lot of these players. Or is it just a byproduct of us focusing all this attention and resources on the players out there on the field? And maybe, in a certain sense, neglecting the actual goalkeepers? Or is it a product of the game changing so much where you got to play out of the back so much that there's fewer and fewer goalkeepers that are able to adapt to that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I definitely agree with your top 2, by the way. With
Okay.
the Eredivisie, it goes way back. Remember, Josie Altidore had prolific seasons
Michael
with AZ
Bradley.
Alkmaar. Michael Bradley scored all those goals for Heerenveen. Aaron Johansson even was very good
That's right.
in the Eredivisie. So, yeah. And then the Bundesliga, this season weirdly hasn't been that great with the Gio situation. Brendan Aronson struggling at Union Berlin. But yeah, overall over the year, the level of acceptance there is very high of Americans. Now, we said at the outset, this was just Europe. We were leaving out MLS and Liga MX. If you were to put those two leagues back in, where would they slot in this?
So if let's say that you are a player and you have just turned, 18, and you've been in a academy for an MLS team. Let's take out the, where your rights are and stuff like that. Let's just say you could snap your fingers and go anywhere that you want. So, for example, I wouldn't want that player. I would take MLS over La Liga. I would take MLS over the championship. And then it would get interesting if any of these three came along, and it would have to depend on the actual player. What type of, how mature that 18-year-old actually is. And I know we can even go back to 15 and 14 and 16-year-olds, but how mature that player is. What's the lineage? What languages do you speak? The style of play that you actually play, is it conducive? But yeah, I would put MLS and Liga MX above those two. So they would be in my top 5, and they would be, even maybe ahead of Serie A. So it would be Bundesliga, Eredivisie, and then MLS, Liga MX.
And the one thing with Liga MX, and we talked about this in our last pod when we were discussing the Brandon Vasquez move to Monterrey, they have not embraced being a selling league to the same degree as MLS. So if you're a young American going there and thinking you're going to use it as a stepping stone to Europe, you have to be careful with that, because if you do well, the team would be reluctant to sell you, and you might end up there longer than you initially planned, which might not be a bad thing if you're doing well, but nevertheless, it's something to consider.
Well, somebody asked me on X today about, we had mentioned Brandon Vasquez going to Liga MX and Cade Cowell going to Liga MX, and this person's point was he or she, I don't know what it was, preferred that they go to someplace like, the Greek Super League or something like that. I would say that Liga MX and MLS are better. And this is just the eye test, okay? And of what this, I don't watch a tremendous amount of the Greek Superliga, which in and of itself says something. I will say that the prestige and the cachet of going to any place in Europe, there is power and value to that, especially if you want to move on. But the actual quality and your development as a player, again, it goes back to just going to Europe. That's easy.
And that's sort of the argument for the championship, because I frankly don't hold that league in very high regard from a technical standpoint. I know I've gotten criticized on X for saying that, but the English do hold it in high regard. So it is a good stepping stone to the Premier League if you do well in the championship. So I think that's what gets that on the list,
exactly,
rather than you being
exactly. No,
impressed with that league.
I'm not enamored by the championship. I don't get up and watch a tremendous amount of championship, or recognizing it as a incredibly romantic and free-flowing and creative league. But as you're planning out your career and you're taking these types of steps, you have to be strategic about this if you are a young player and you are looking to make that move. And again, it's the style of play. It's the city that you are in. It's how you and your significant other and all that kind of stuff fare in these types of environments. There's so much more that goes into it. But anyway, tell us what you think your list would look like and what you would recommend and the advice that you would give to a young player who is coming out. Because we're going to have more and more of them that are faced with this. We talked a lot in the last pod about collegiate soccer and what it is and isn't, and the bypassing of the traditional collegiate pathway. And so now you're going to have these players that have development under their belts, but they don't have that club situation, and they're going to have offers. People are going to come, and they're going to say, this is why this is best for your development, and this is why this is smart and strategic for that next step after you go to one of these places. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.